Welcome once again to this exciting edition of the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule is based on a verse in the Bible where Jesus said to treat other people the way you want them to treat you. Well, you know what? One of my listeners suggested to me that there might be people watching this program who don't really have a clue about the Bible and how it's put together. So I thought I would take this program and give you a little bit of a Bible overview. And so just as starters, let me just ask you a question. Tell me if you can answer it. What's the longest book in the Bible? Okay, the answer is the book of Psalms. How many books are in the Bible? You know what? This isn't a book. We call it a Bible, but it's not a book. It's a library. How many books are in this library? Does anybody know? 66 books. It's broken down into two sections. Do you know what the two sections are? Did you say Old Testament and New Testament? You are right. You're absolutely right. Gold star on your chart. How many books in the Old Testament? Well, I don't know. Well, here's a good way to remember. The word old has 3 letters in it. The word testament has 9 letters. Put the 3 and the 9 together side by side and you get the number 39. Bingo! 39 books in the Old Testament. And if you put a times sign between the 3 and the 9, what do you get? 27. 3 times 9 is 27. Now if you take 39 and 27 and add them together, you get a total of 68 books. That's just a quick way, hopefully it'll help you to remember that. You say, why do I need to know that? It's just a good idea to know a little bit about the Bible. So, many of what we call books are actually letters that were written to somebody else. For instance, the book of Luke is a letter that was written to a man named Theophilus. And in the book, Luke is explaining everything that Jesus did while he was here on the earth to his friend Theophilus. And so that letter takes about 3.5 hours to read. So, if you got a letter from a dear friend and you were anxious to know what he had to say, would you say, well, I think I'll read 1 page a day for the next month? No, you want to read the whole thing. What's he got to say? And the further you read, they say, oh, this is good. I want to read more. You read the whole letter. You know, when Sharon and I were dating, she was in Canada and I was in Florida, and we would write letters every day, long, 4, 5, 6, 7 page, 8 page, 9 page letters. And when her letter came in, I didn't throw it in the corner and say, I'll read it when I get a chance. Boom. I read that letter and I read every single word, every single page, and then I read it a second time because I wanted to experience that whole thing for myself. And so people don't understand. They think this is a book, and in order to get the most out of it, you start with page 1 and you go to the last page in the book and you read every page just boom, 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 boom. No, that's not the way you read the Bible. When you go to a library, what do? You look for books that fit the category that you're interested in at that particular time. You check those books out, you read them, and you take them back. So this Bible is filled with books of all different kinds of activity. For instance, who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? Can you tell me? I'll tell you. If you can't tell me, you might have gotten it right, but the answer is Moses. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. That's a lot of writing. Do you know the names of those books? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. There's 5 of them. And Genesis, the word means beginnings, origins. You know the word genes, generations, generational. That's where this whole book of Genesis is based. So if you want to know how it all got started, you read the book of Genesis. And there you'll read about how God created the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, everything, the trees, the planets, the birds and the bees and the water and the fish and everything. God created all of that. You know how long it took him? 6 days. It's in the book of Genesis. You can read it. And then he created Adam, and Adam was given his first assignment, name all the animals. You know, we think of the original man as being some kind of an ignoramus caveman type numbskull guy. No, Adam was brilliant, intellectually brilliant. And he named all the animals. He had a vocabulary. God gave him a vocabulary. He could talk. So, in Genesis, you read about Adam and Eve. You read about Satan. You'll read about Noah and the flood. You'll read about Sodom and Gomorrah, which we talked about on the previous program. You'll read about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, and all their lives and how they all fit together. If you want to read the history of the origin of mankind and how it developed, read the book of Genesis. Well, the Jews ended up being put in slavery after a while, and they ended up in Egypt for 430 years. If you want to read about that time and how they got out, you read the book of Exodus. Exodus means to exit, get out. How do you get out? God brought the people out of Egypt with 10 amazing, miraculous, supernatural manifestations to get the king, Pharaoh, to let the people go. But he was a hard-headed dude, and he says, no, I'm not letting them go. And he paid a severe price for that, but that was his thing. No, I'm not letting him go. So, the book of Exodus talks about that. Leviticus talks about the laws that the Jews had to operate under. The book of Numbers lists the population of the tribes, and the book of Deuteronomy is a summary of the whole travelings of the Jews. So those are the first 5 books. Now the Old Testament is broken down into 5 sections, and there's 5 books in the first section. What are they? The books of Moses. You got it. The second group has 12. These are called the books of history. Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Those are the books of history. You want to know the history of the Jewish nation? You go to those books. Then comes the books of poetry, 5 of them. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Where do you go when you want to get some comfort from God? You go to the book of Psalms. Where do you go when you want to get some wisdom from God? You go to the book of Proverbs. And so each of these books has a specific purpose. Then, after those comes the prophets. There's 2 groups of prophets, major prophets and minor prophets. How many major prophets? 5. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And then the next 12, the last 12, are the minor prophets. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. 12 of them. So there's 5, 12, 5, 5, 12, which totals Old Testament. How many in the Old Testament? 39 books. So there's 5, 12, 5, 5, 12. That's the Old Testament. If you want to learn about Jesus, you don't read the Old Testament. You've got to go to the New Testament. And there are 4 books in the New Testament that describe the life of Jesus while he was on planet Earth. How long was he here? 33 and a half years. That's it. And so there's 4 guys that wrote about his activities during those 30 years. They're called the gospel writers. And they wrote the first 4 books of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So if you want to know about Jesus and the things that he said out of his mouth, you go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. And each of these books describes the life of Jesus from the perspective of the writer. So one writer might have seen one thing in a particular setting, and another writer might have seen another thing which the first writer didn't mention. So you read all 4 of these to get a composite picture of what Jesus' life was like. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the first 4 books of the New Testament. Now, if you want to find out what happened after Jesus left the planet, he assigned his disciples, he gave them a commission: go into the whole world and preach the gospel to every creature, and teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. And then he that believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that believes not shall be damned. Oh, did you ever hear anybody say, I'll be damned? Well, it's not a good idea, but people say that. It's a Bible phrase. If you don't believe in Jesus, you'll be damned. You'll go to hell. Ooh, I don't believe in hell. Good on you. That doesn't make it non-existent because you say you don't believe in it. God says there's a heaven and there's a hell. There's a life after death. Oh, I don't believe in a life after death. Good on you. But when you stand before the judge, after you die, you'll change your mind. You say, oh, I didn't think there was anything more. You were wrong. You were wrong. So the book of Acts describes what the apostles did after Jesus left planet Earth. And you know what they did? The same things that he did. They healed the sick, they cast out devils, they cleansed the lepers, and they raised the dead. And they preached the gospel. And they went all over the place, preaching the gospel and working the same miracles that Jesus worked. Well, then the rest of the New Testament, the next book is called the book of Romans. Genesis, no, you see, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans. Yeah, that's Romans. That's the next one. A very egghead type theological book. If you want to learn more about the theology of Jesus and Christianity, you read Romans. 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Those last books then, many of them, 17 of them, were written by a guy named, he started out as Saul of Tarsus. He became the Apostle Paul. And he was a brilliant man, a Pharisee, one of the higher echelon of the Jewish leaders, hated Jesus with a passion, hated him, wanted to get rid of him and everybody else that had anything to do with him. So he spent his lifetime, first part of it, rounding up people, throwing them in jail, or having them killed for believing in Jesus. That's it. That was their crime. They believe in Jesus. So he was on his way on a mission one day to Damascus. He had a letter from the high priest saying, go to Damascus and find some of these troublemaking rabble-rousers and arrest them and bring them in here and beat them up and do whatever you want to do with them because we got to get rid of them. And on the way, something happened to Saul of Tarsus. He was traveling with a bunch of guys. And on the way, as they were traveling, all of a sudden, a bright light, brighter than the sun, hit him. And it had such power in it that Saul fell to the ground. Fell to the ground. And then he heard a voice. And the guys that were with him also heard the voice. And the voice said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? A voice out of nowhere. Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul had enough sense to say, who are you, Lord? Who are you? I'm Jesus, whom you persecute. You know, that's one of my favorite verses in the Bible because it says to me, for anyone who's out serving Jesus and gets persecuted because of it, ridiculed, make fun of, thrown rocks at, burn down your house, whatever, they're not attacking you. They're attacking him. Oh, and he's perfectly capable of defending himself. Saul said, what do you want me to do? And Jesus said, get up and get into town, and when you get in there, I'll tell you what to do. Well, he stood up, but he was blind. Blind. We talked about that on last week's program, didn't we? Blind. He couldn't see. He couldn't see for 3 days. And so, during those 3 days, he sat at home fasting. He didn't eat. He refused to eat. He's blind, he couldn't eat. At the same time, God visits a man named Ananias and says, go over to this guy's house and pray for Saul. And Saul saw Ananias in a vision. He's blind. Blind, but he saw a vision. How can you see a vision if you're blind? Your spiritual eyes aren't the same as your physical eyes. You can see with your spiritual eyes. Well, anyway, the rest of the book is exciting. How many books in the Bible? 66. How many in the Old Testament? 39. How many in the New Testament? 27. That's a very, very broad brush look at the whole Bible. But I encourage you to read it and read it and read it. And don't just read it. James says, be doers of the word, not just hearers only, deceiving your own selves. Got it? Okay. God bless you. See you next time. I just want to mention to you real quickly, on April 4th at Christian Fellowship Church, we're live streaming a program from Ohio entitled Healing Summit, with Dutch Sheets. And it's going to be a live stream event of a healing meeting that's taking place there in Ohio. We're gonna live stream it at Christian Fellowship Church at 6 o'clock on Friday, April 4th. We invite you to come and join us, especially if you need a miracle or if you want to see a miracle. If you don't believe in miracles, come and you will see some miracles right in front of your eyes. God bless you. April 4th, 6 o'clock, Christian Fellowship Church.